Welcome to the Pious Reflections Podcast. I am your host, Daniel Roberts. We've got a lot to talk about tonight, and I am on a tight schedule, so we're going to dive right into it. Netflix appears to be in free fall as subscribers cancel their Netflix accounts, and Elon Musk is leading the way. We'll talk about that and whether or not it's going to be successful. We also are going to talk about whether or not Pope Leo making comments have totally distracted evangelicals and Protestants from any success that the Netflix cancellations could have. And also we are going to be talking about the best movie of 2025 that I have seen in a long time, Triumph of the Heart, a movie about St. Maximillian Kolbe, and why it reminds us that St. Maximillian Kolbe is the saint for our time. So today we're going to jump in on the Netflix stuff first. And this is interesting because Netflix has not really done much in terms of failure. They've done a lot of bad things. I personally unsubscribed from Netflix way before it was cool. But whenever these kinds of things happen, people want them to be successful. And so the question is it going to be successful? And Babylon Bee seems to think that that is probably not likely to be the case, as they posted this on October 2nd. Conservative family cancels Netflix account forever for the fifth time, which frankly is pretty much true amongst Christian conservatives. The reality is that there's no way that this is going to be successful unless Christians actually change their perspective on entertainment. So, for example, if we look at what Forbes actually put out, which I think it was Forbes that put this out here. It's I don't have the... Yeah, I had the Forbes thing, but I think it's something. But Netflix stock drops again, now down 2.4% since Musk's call for cancellations. This was on October 2nd, so that was a large drop. We also have another detail here where libs of TikTok posted another post on October 3rd that said Netflix stock hits a 2-month low after Elon Musk tells followers to cancel subscription. So there's a couple things here right out the gate, is that there was an event back like 6 years ago where Netflix decided to run a show called Cuties. And it was not a family-friendly show, and it got a lot of flack. Ted Cruz, I believe it was him that got involved as well on social media. I don't know if there was any actual governmental involvement or anything like that, but there was an outcry of people saying, hey, we should really cancel Netflix at this point. And it was shocking to me as I talked amongst my friends and family and Christian leaders that I knew personally in private that they wouldn't actually cancel their Netflix accounts. And, I'm not talking to anybody famous, but I'm talking, people who are in leadership positions at schools, et cetera, or they're, maybe a pastor somewhere or something like that. These are Christian leaders. And all of them pretty much said the same thing. Well, it's not going to matter anyway. So who cares? And I've worked at nonprofits all my life, and for the most part until recently. And this is not my full-time gig, so that's a great time to ask you to subscribe, comment, and tell me what you think about this episode. But the reality is that one of the reasons why these boycotts, especially when they're led by Christians, don't work is, number one, their Christian leaders don't really care. And number two is this central idea that many Christians kind of have, and I've been guilty of it myself, which is the idea that God deserves our work, but he does not deserve our leisure. Let me say that again. We believe as Christians that we should pursue something as far as work goes for God, but we don't believe that he deserves our free time, our leisure. Now, you'll hear pastors talk about this all the time. Are you going to volunteer? Are you going to do this? But your leisure tells us what you really love. What you do in your free time tells us what you really love. And I mean after you've volunteered for your church and after you've taking care of your kids and all these kinds of things. What are you actually in love with? And when we look at the data around Netflix, we see some pretty shocking numbers that show that people are in love with Netflix. And one of the most shocking things about being in Christian ministry was how many people didn't seem to care that Netflix absolutely and totally hated anything to do with Christianity. Just didn't care about it at all. At least their particular perspective of Christianity. We'll get to that in a little bit. But here we have another clip, or another quote rather. Top Netflix statistics 2025 at a glance. Okay, Netflix reached 301.6 million paid subscribers globally. By the way, that's after they cracked down on password sharing. So they actually went up after they made it harder to subscribe. The United States has 81.44 million Netflix subscribers, and America is the largest Christian nation. So, you can kind of just figure that there's a lot of Christians in that bunch, making it the largest single market. And in Q2, or quarter two, 2025, Netflix made $11 billion in revenue. Notice that's not profit, crossing the expected value of 11.04. Blah, 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 blah. This is important. Netflix users spend around 63 minutes per day watching content on the platform. Now, those numbers should be a little bit concerning, mainly because of the fact that if we are the largest pool of subscribers and the largest Christian nation, that means that a lot of people are actually subscribing and following Netflix, which, according to Robbie Starbuck on X, says, we'll watch this together, says that Netflix made this video about their corporate culture. The video has Netflix denouncing neutrality on divisive issues and promoting transgenderism, BLM, and more so they can transform culture. Netflix is a social engineering company, not an entertainment company. So let's watch and see what they say.
Shift in our company and in the industries that surround us. The neutral period is over. We need the courageous period. And that is part of how we are thinking about transformation, cultural change, content that allows for stories of all sorts of groups of people to be heard and for all of us to have meaningful lives with dignity, even in the places we work.
Workers of the world unite. So at the end of the day, there are Christians that work at Netflix. I know, because I see on my LinkedIn that there are alumni from my seminary that work there. I don't know who they are. We're not friends. But that's very shocking to me that the seminary that I went to, which was a very good seminary, despite the fact that they kind of take digs at Catholics from time to time, but we were really well educated on ethics. And I can say that because the Catholics that have met me are always very impressed with the education that I received from Protestants on natural law, on philosophy and ethics and these kinds of things. And it's all, I'm indebted entirely to my seminary. Now, I don't say my seminary name because I became a Catholic, and, I don't want to cause any sort of extra, fodder for people who want to say, see, those guys are making a bunch of Catholics. But the point is that you've got Christians working at what is essentially a propaganda company to undermine every fundamental moral teaching of Christianity for 2,000 years. And they're pumping this out to the entire world. So it's not just that you should cancel your subscription to Netflix. I'm fully in line with that. In fact, maybe I can practice an ad read. Let me tell you about Netflix. Cancel your Netflix subscription today. There you go. Maybe Michael Knowles will see this and he'll say, hey, that's a good ad read. But the reality is that when it comes to what is going on at Netflix, there's a good chance that this isn't going to do anything. And inevitably, people are going to lose their momentum for a couple of reasons. Number one, millennials are the largest group of users. They're 40% of the user base. Gen X is next at around 30%. We have another chart here that I'll put up on the screen. And you have 40% millennials, Generation X, 30%, baby boomers are very low. Gen Z, which is encouraging, which is apparently trending towards very conservative, is much lower. So the question is, how are we going to actually get people to get off the platform and actually have any sort of sustaining staying power on this front? Well, it comes back to this question of, what are you going to do with your leisure? And this quote came to me as I was doing the Liturgy of the Hours. This is week 2, Wednesday evening prayer. Intercessions, Liturgy of the Hours, volume 4. For those that don't know what Liturgy of the Hours is, it's essentially Catholic devotions. And we sing the Psalms and we sing hymns, and you do it by yourself or you do it in a group. And there's scripture readings and there's prayers, and it's the coolest way to do devotions I've ever done in my life. Can't recommend it enough. But this stuck out to me. It was during the part of the Liturgy of the Hours evening prayer where you're asking for prayers, or you're giving God prayers for different things. And one of them was to God, let your faithful ones seek and taste the things that are above, and let them direct their work and their leisure to your glory. I'll put it up on the screen so you can see. Let your faithful ones seek and taste the things that are above, and let them direct their work and their leisure to your glory. And it's that one bit right there that I want to talk about, the leisure aspect coming full circle. My dad told me when I was young that if I was trying to kick a bad habit, that I would need to replace it with something. And streaming entertainment is by definition filling a void in your life. It's filling your free time. It's filling your leisure. And it says a lot about us, probably more about us, what we do in our free time than it does about what we do for our jobs. Unless, of course, you're working for Netflix, in which case that seems to be an entirely different moral issue altogether. But you could probably think about it like this. Where you work tells us about your integrity. What you do in your free time tells us something about what you love. And I don't think there's much on Netflix that you should love. You should be giving not just your work to God, but your leisure to God. And what that means is you don't have to be just putting your head into a book, but maybe you should write a book. Maybe you should do something that's a little bit more involved for your soul rather than just filling it full of trash and garbage. That's going to ultimately lead to you believing things that probably aren't that great. Like that we're just okay now with a video going around with transgender people getting married and two men kissing on these things. These are problematic things for us to just be, okay, whatever. So what I would like to suggest to you is that you actually fill the vacuum. Okay, if you're somebody who has just canceled your subscription to Netflix, first, congratulations. You are on your way to a better and more profitable life, one in which that you might even get holier as a result. But it depends on what you fill that vacuum with. If you fill it with video games, it's probably not going to do much, especially if you're a millennial, because now millennials are like in their 40s. Like Netflix is just video games for adults. And frankly, I think you'd be better off playing a lot of video games sometimes. But there's a lot of things you can do. You can do a Hillsdale free online course. And I'm not getting any kickbacks for any of these. These are just things that came to my mind off the cuff as I was getting ready to do this. You could do a Peterson Academy course. Put your money towards that. It's like $500 a year. Well, you know what? If you take your price from Netflix, if it's a family account or maybe your YouTube streaming account, whatever it is that you're going to cancel, maybe you should put it into some actual make me a better thinker kind of stuff, since Netflix is obviously not accomplishing that goal. You could start some music lessons. You could do the great book series, go and buy the great books of the Western world and just read through them with a group of friends. Yeah, these things will take time, but guess what? The average person in America or on Netflix is watching 60 movies a year. 60 movies. And they're streaming 60 minutes a day. So you've got to have some time to do this. So you could also use the money that you save to attend a TPUSA event, or maybe get involved in a Bible study, or write a book yourself, or last but not least, have a baby, start a family. And then you'll actually have a reason to unsubscribe, millennials, since we seem to be lacking in that department. But this all comes down to this. We can pray, we can, sit there and shake our fingers at the world, and we can say all this stuff, but holiness will not come only because we prayed. It only will come as if we have two things, prayer and sacrifice. A priest told me once that holiness is not just prayer, but it is also penance. That is sacrifice. It's like holiness is like a bird, and its two wings are prayer and sacrifice. It's not enough for us to just say, oh, God, I really want to be a better person. Well, if you really want to be a better person, you're going to have to do what's traditionally called mortifications. You're going to have to decide that you're going to give something up, particularly for someone you love. So, for example, just a little thing. Little things like this, like canceling your Netflix subscription, is great because it's the beginning of something better. But even something as small as like, you know what, I'm going to not put sugar in my coffee. I'm not going to doctor it up. And saying, I'm giving this up for God to help me in my virtue, give me more courage, or maybe do it because you want to ask God to help you love somebody more. These are the kinds of things where prayer and penance kind of come together as sword and shield, so to speak. Think of prayer as your defense and penance as your offense. And that's the only way we're going to be able to beat any of these cultural wars. Because here's the reality, guys. Like, we're not winning. And we're going to find out why that is the case as we talk about Pope Leo and some of his recent comments and different things. And I'm going to pull this slide up. This is the Pope Leo on Ice slide. I was pretty happy with this. And that is not to disrespect the Holy Father or anything like that, but, I have some thoughts on what happened. This is actually so that I can, find the slide when I have to do the cuts for this segment of the show. So there's 2 points that I want to bring up as we get into Pope Leo. So if you missed it on the Netflix thing, basically you're not going to win against any of these corporate giants because at the end of the day, you can't give up these things to bring them down. First and foremost, you need to do these boycotts in order to give your leisure to God. And then, maybe there's a couple other woke businesses or whatever that are still in your queue, whatever. Right now, Netflix is the one that is probably the best one to give up because you've got a lot of people who are rallying behind you. This is great momentum for you to give your leisure to God. So now that we're going to talk about the Pope Leo and the Catholic Church, there's a lot to talk about on this one. How am I doing on time here? All right, sweet. We are sitting right at like 18 minutes, I think. Is that accurate? Yeah. Okay, we're doing good on time. So we should be done in less than an hour. So the Catholic Church, there were a lot of different things. So for people that don't know where this image came from, I'm talking about this ice image, the Pope was involved in a blessing of the waters is what they said. And I wanted to play the clip because you just kind of feel bad for Pope Leo because I really didn't get the impression that he really wanted to be there. I don't think that that's necessarily an excuse for the fact that it's bad optics or any of that. It's obviously bad optics. It doesn't look good. But it is kind of funny, though, that Arnold Schwarzenegger was there for like the blessing of this big ice cube and he played Mr. Freeze. I saw, I believe it was Twitter account, Dr. Taylor Marshall, who also was sharing those thoughts out there. So, I mean, some of this is just kind of funny. And if you read church history, you know that there's plenty of silly jokes about some of the things that happened that seem just fitting, That's part of the fun of being a Catholic. It's not that you're superstitious, but you do notice things. That's my favorite phrase at the moment. But there were a lot of things that kind of popped up around this. First of all, there was this blessing of the waters. But then there was also this somewhat scandalous... I'm going to preface this a little bit. Comments where Pope Leo was surrounded by reporters, and he was asked a question about pro-life or immigration or whatever. Anyway, bottom line is like pro-life, the death penalty, and immigration all got rolled into one. So before I play that clip, I want to say there's two things that we're going to talk about around the Pope. And the first thing is that this still proves that Catholicism is the true religion. And I'm going to take a stab at trying to show that. But the second thing is to offer some perspective on what scandal is in the church and how we oftentimes are going after the people in authority, and that's fine, but for saying things they shouldn't have said or saying things off the cuff. But we sometimes forget another piece of scandal, and we're gonna talk about that after we play this clip. So here's the clip. I'm gonna pull this up real quick and get it queued up. And this is from MSNBC. And it's important to note that you'll see with this clip why, no matter what you think about this clip, is going to be very difficult it's going to be used and used and used again against Christians who have been fighting the pro-life battle.
So someone who says that I'm against abortion, but I'm in agreement with the inhuman treatment of immigrants who are in the United States, I don't know if that's pro-life.
Baby, the Pope is reminding us that morality is not a buffet. You can just choose compassion for some and cruelty for others.
That Augustinian is coming out, and I'm loving every moment of it. Look, this reminding, remember that moment of Pope Francis on the plane? And he was asked the question about, gay marriage, and it's like, who am I to judge? That's the moment. You get a little insight into the papal thinking on a critical moral question. And what he linked is, you can't play in the space that a lot of people I know and have been in the party with for a long time who look at me cockeyed because I am pro-life across the board. You don't get to say I'm pro-life for the baby in the womb, but I'm not pro-life for the man sitting in the jail cell. And this Pope is saying you don't get to make that choice because the moral compass connects to both. So if you're supporting life, how do you sit then and argue that this individual should die? And so raising that up is important. What I also found fascinating and most amusing was the number of conservative cardinals in the country who decided to speak upon this and to go after more progressive or other cardinals. And the word basically came to me was like, hey, keep my archdiocese out of your mouth. You worry about your own little kingdom. Don't worry about mine. And so I think we're going to see some very interesting lines drawn with this Pope along, as you opened it, on the moral compass, sort of directing us in a way that we haven't had a direction before. And I think that's going to be important.
But do you think J.D. Vance listens? Do you think other notable Catholics
J.D. Vance doesn't understand what the hell this Pope just said.
It's insane.
He has no clue.
I will know.
He would get out and make the case, well, you know, pro-life in protecting the womb, when you commit a crime, there's...
All right, so bottom line is that there's a lot said in that clip, and they didn't even talk about immigration, which is the clip that they pulled. But the bottom line is that one of the things that MSNBC, I don't even know who that guy is, but he's obviously somebody who's claiming to be pro-life. There's a lot going on in that situation, and I'm talking about this because I'm a new Catholic, and so inevitably, I feel like some people are going to ask me, well, did you see what the Pope said? How you feeling now? You feeling pretty good about your decision? And, you know, like, yeah, I'm still feeling really good about the decision. And the reason why is because I don't think that they realize that the obsession that Protestants have with the Pope is in and of itself a kind of argument for the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is really the only one that has any sort of what is borderline miraculous stability of a church that still holds together, despite the fact that there's been like 30 anti-popes. So that's not to say that Pope Leo XIV is an anti-pope or anything like that. And if you don't know what that term means, look it up. It just means that basically a pope didn't fulfill his duties. That's a there's a much more detailed answer for it, but no one's saying that about Pope Leo. And the bottom line is that I think you can at least just kind of step back for a minute and, as a Catholic, think about this as if the Pope were your actual dad. Like, your dad says something like this at a public event, and people come up to you and say, "So, did you hear what your dad said?" Well, that's kind of the frame in which we should talk about it. Now, it's a public statement, so we can talk about it publicly. It's not like, Pope Leo was on a hot mic or anything like that. He chose to say these things publicly, and so we can respectfully talk about them publicly, but we shouldn't be throwing things around like, oh my word, the church is going to hell in a handbasket or any of these kinds of things, because there is actually an argument to be said. I know that people are going to sit back and say, I can't believe you're saying this, but just for the sake of argument, let's just try and figure out what we might learn from the idea of just it being presented. Well, you can't be pro-life and be pro-death penalty. Okay, well, let's just try and understand it from that perspective. There is some challenges there because, number one, who is actually going to administer the death penalty? We all know as Catholics that killing somebody is not a good thing, like for the soul of the person who does it. So we know this from the fact that, people have psychological trauma from carrying out the death penalty, either in war or like the Nazis who were doing mass killings. Like it started to have an impact on them. Russians, they were just executing people. Now they were executing so many of them that it obviously got bad. And so we're not trying to say that there's some well, you kill one, you're going to be fine, but you kill 10. The point is that it's just not good for your soul to kill a person. And the question becomes, how do you even recruit for that? Now, we obviously have this on the books already, so there are people who carry this out. But you can see how on the surface, it might be a challenge to reconcile the two until you actually ask the question, okay, well, what's the substance of the death that we are talking about? And the death penalty is something that you can go and look that it has always been something that is permissible, although it is something that should be avoided. So some people will point out that, updates to the catechism and things like that. Bottom line is that these are not infallible statements. And so what we're actually seeing here is not the Pope operating out of his moral teaching authority in the sense of he's declaring a dogma for everybody, but we are seeing just how powerful the papacy actually is in terms of helping people to understand the world in which they live, for good or for bad. And so if we equate this murder of an innocent child in the womb, infanticide, in fact, Michael Knowles had a great take on this. I meant to grab the clip, but I forgot. So if you get a chance to take it, I thought he's a professional. So, I felt like he did an incredible job approaching this. In fact, I think that Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles were kind of like good Catholic, bad Catholic in terms of how to approach this. Not that either one did anything morally wrong in their approach, but you could definitely tell one was, kind of suave and, genteel, and the other one was like, hey, what's going on here? I'll let you figure out which one it is. But just ask the question, okay, well, if what we're saying is just you can't be pro-death penalty of bad people per se, okay, well then can people go to war? Can young men join the army if they're going to be asked to kill people? I mean, there's even the chance that innocent people could die as a result of me, flying a bomber or shooting a rocket somewhere or being an artillery guy. Is that also incompatible with pro-life? So one of the things to keep in mind is that this is a very short clip. Pope Leo is basically walking for 30 seconds, gets grabbed by some reporters, quick question, off-the-cuff answer, and I have a lot of sympathy for Pope Francis, rest in peace, and Pope Leo, because these are really the first popes who have what is a phenomenon known as social media, following their every breath. But they're not following the breath of, say, the Anglican denomination, who recently just made history. Literally 30 seconds of a 30 seconds of a pope talking to a couple reporters has led to the world talking about him, and standing in front of an ice cube. Okay, standing in front of an ice cube, couple minutes with reporters. Granted, I don't think any of it looks good. It's weird. It's not going to help us evangelize. Not the first time that's happened in church history. Doesn't seem to have an impact on us, but maybe there will be a time when it does. But at the end of the day, history was made in the Church of England. Like, first time in 500 years, they nominated a female Archbishop of Canterbury. And no one cares. No one cares. And we should all sit back and ask, well, why is that? And the reason why is because everybody knows that the implicitly or explicitly that the leader of the Christian world is the Pope. But just that's the reality. If you are a man who just gets stopped on the street by reporters, they ask you a question about the Christian faith and the rest of the world is talking about it, that's a pretty good indication that you're in charge of something much larger than yourself. So one of the reactions that people had to this, as I was on Twitter, it was and kind of defending the case that, yes, this isn't a good look, but Protestants, you say that this centralization that we have as Catholics, which even that is kind of a misnomer, because you still have cardinals and you still do have checks and balances within the church. And clearly the Catholic Church has had a way better track record in terms of doctrine, even if they may have arguably a worse track record of hypocrites. But in terms of doctrine, in terms of what you look around and you see all of the moral ills, the Netflix issues, the abortion issue, the transgender issue, the LGBT issue, gay marriage, all of these things, okay? Virtually every major Protestant denomination that is decentralized because they don't want a pope has actually fallen into deep and deep moral sin, beginning in the 1930s. In fact, in the book Defenders of the Unborn, I think it was by, let me see, I can't remember who it was by. Let me double check. Daniel K. Williams, yep. The pro-life movement before Roe v. Wade. He shows that Margaret Sanger did not target Catholic ministers. She targeted Protestant ministers and got somewhere around 3,600 to help her in what would become Planned Parenthood. Now, everybody knows that the Catholics have all these moral distinctions, all these different things. And we have a pope. And everybody is always waiting for the pope to do something that they can really stick it to, their Catholic brethren. But I just want to go through some statistics here of the largest denominations in the United States that are Protestant. So we're going to take a look at these and their different doctrinal statements. This is from the Gospel Coalition comparing PCUSA to PCA. The PCUSA is the largest Presbyterian denomination in the U.S. That's the largest one. They are the most liberal one. They have 10,000 congregations, 1.7 million members, and 20,000 ministers. The denomination has been steadily losing members in churches since 1983 and has lost 37% of its membership since 1992. Okay, but they're still the largest one. The PCA is the second largest Presbyterian denomination in the U.S., has approximately 1,800 congregations, 367,000 members, 4,400 ministers. The denomination has been one of the faster growing denominations in the United States, growing tenfold since 1983. Okay, great. But like you're at 1,800 and the PCUSA is at 10,000. So not having this ability to just break off whenever people just go astray rather than having church discipline, whether that be through the leadership or whether that be just from the Holy Spirit course correcting the church, seems to be a problem. So next, we're going to look at the Methodist Church, which also recently had a split. If you go to their website right now, you will see in the basically About Us section, what is the church's position on homosexuality? Now, again, they have split, but this is the majority group. From my research, that's what I saw. So if I'm wrong, let me know. But you're going to see what is the church's position on homosexuality. And they are going to say, after over 5 decades of strife and adoption of policies that increasingly excluded non-heterosexual persons from the clergy and receiving the full ministries of the church, the 2024 General Conference removed all those restrictions and replaced them with a series of affirmations and agreements about how all persons will be treated with respect to their sexuality or gender identity. These updated provisions are in an entire effect as of January 1, 2025. Some of them went into immediate effect as the close of the 2024 General Conference, May 3rd, 2024. So when we consider that, we understand, okay, here you have the PCUSA and you have the United Methodist Church. These are like in the top, unless you consider independents. But if you're talking mainline denominations, which is important, and we'll get to that in a second, you have a real problem with the fact that these are the largest denominations, and virtually every single moral or societal ill that you currently see mainstream today are not only what broke those denominations, those are the largest chunks of those denominations. Now, maybe you've got some people who are going to try and reclaim those. You could have another Reformation. A good example of a denomination that went wayward and then came back is the SBC. So here is the 1971 resolution on abortion. It says, whereas, and this is the SBC in 1971. So Roe v. Wade has not been passed yet. It says, whereas Christians in American society today are faced with difficult decisions about abortion, and whereas some advocate that there be no abortion legislation, thus making the decision a purely private matter between woman and her doctor, and whereas others advocate no legal abortion or would permit abortion only if the life of the mother is threatened, therefore be it resolved that this convention express the belief that society has a responsibility to affirm through the laws of the state a high view of the sanctity of human life, including fetal life, in order to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and be it further resolved that we call upon Southern Baptists to work for legislation that will allow the possibility of abortion under such conditions as rape, incest, clear evidence of severe fetal deformity, and carefully ascertained evidence of the likelihood of damage and the emotional, mental, and physical health of the mother. That was in 1971. 1973, Roe v. Wade is passed. Now, we can all complain about Catholics being hypocrites. We all see the ones out there trying to do the gay pride stuff, and they're trying to do these things and be soft pedaling some of these things. But everyone knows that's not what the church teaches. Everyone knows that those people are not actually advocating for what the church teaches. And so we can complain about the fact that leadership isn't being stronger on the punishment. We can complain about all these things. But as a Catholic, we recognize that the church will be guided by the Holy Spirit. And the evidence we would see from that would be that even with bad leaders, the church still holds its position on things like abortion, which is weird because it's even holding its position on contraception, which is probably one of the biggest contributors to the fact that we have the lowest birth rate in the history of the country, and are probably not going to get it back unless Protestant churches actually adopt Catholic social teaching on it. If all the Protestant churches suddenly tomorrow said, you know what, we were wrong about contraception, we need to start telling people that children are a gift from God, and that ultimately God is the one who decides how many children they have, and that they should be open to life and any sort of conjugal act in the bedroom, well, then yeah, like I think we would see a serious uptick. And guess what? On the issue of death penalty and pro-life stuff, I mean, would we be willing to take abortion is totally and entirely illegal? And, you can still go to jail for life, but we just don't have the death penalty? I mean, might be something to consider, at least talking about. I mean, if these people on MSNBC want to sit there and say, oh, J.D. Vance doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, okay, fine. Then how about this? You guys get rid of abortion legislation across the board, and then we can talk about whether or not we should have the death penalty, just as a purely political matter. But the SBC actually did, shortly after this, it fixed its problem. It says, this is, I believe, in 1976, maybe? I don't know. It's a very quick turnaround. Therefore, be it resolved that the messengers of the Southern Baptist Convention meeting in Norfolk in June 1976 reaffirmed the biblical sacredness and dignity of all human life, including fetal life, and be it further resolved that we call on Southern Baptists and all citizens of the nation to work to change those attitudes and conditions which encourage many people to turn to abortion as a means of birth control. And be it further resolved that in the best interest of our society, we reject any indiscriminate attitude toward abortion as contrary to the biblical view. And be it further resolved that we also affirm our conviction about the limited role of government in dealing with matters relating to abortion and support the right of expectant mothers to the full range of medical services and personal counseling for the preservation of life and health. Okay, so a lot of words there. At the end of the day, the SBC actually did come around, even if it's not as clear as mud in that entire thing. They do come around eventually. You can go and look. They actually have, to their credit. I mean, the Baptists, I know we don't agree on everything, but talk about integrity. I mean, like, they could bury this thing. They have made their website so easy to search. It is ridiculous. Talk about integrity. But again, this is one of the things that I want to talk about, though, is that the church teaching on a matter, especially if only 20% of your population are Catholics, and you've got something like 60% Protestant, and the top 3 mainline denominations have all broken off because of homosexuality, abortion, or female ordination. And now it's even infected like the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is, it's not just that it's a female archbishop, it's that female archbishop is pro-choice and pro-LGBT. So when we look at the Pope and we realize, like, man, well, nobody's saying that the Pope, like this was said a couple times, well, nobody's saying that the Pope is that our pastors who do these things is the head of the church. Okay. But that doesn't seem to matter because you compromised on everything that would falsify the Catholic Church. Like, these denominations have all made something, like any of these that we've gone through, any of them, where if all of a sudden there was this permission to like have gay marriage in the church, like suddenly gay marriage and marriage, the real thing, are equated, we would have a real problem. We'd have a serious problem in the Catholic Church about, you'd basically see a massive schism, like immediately. But again, that hasn't happened. And if you actually go and grab the catechism and you actually start going through it, you'll realize that the church that has the actual possibility of unity, along with the moral teachings of the church that you want all your Protestant churches to have and actually stick to, they have them. And that's important because they haven't faltered yet. And that's a pretty good track record, all things considered. 2,000 years of lots of good popes and bad popes. I mean, there's a pope that had a mistress. You'd think that guy would be like, you know what? Why don't we change this thing? But he didn't. So there's a lot of things out there. And again, you can do deep dives on all these. But the reality is that if you're someone thinking about becoming Catholic and you saw what happened, this should actually like encourage you. Like, this is the church worth fighting for. This is the church that Jesus died for. And I don't know why you'd want to be in a church that you don't agree with 100%. on its morals. In fact, I would argue that if the Protestants actually just decided to say, you know what, we're not going to take the Mary stuff, we're not going to take the Eucharist stuff, but you know what, these Catholics, they seem to know what's going on morally. They seem to have really thought through all of these things. Maybe we should adopt those. And, you're starting to see places like that, like the SBC on IVF. That's a huge win. But unless these mainline denominations not only take those moral stands, if they don't start to get the numbers, we're not winning this culture war at all, which is why you have to make sure that you are actually following somebody and looking not just at the doctrines, but following somebody like St. Maximillian Kolbe, meaning when we look at the actual saints of the Catholic Church, and we're going to talk about St. Maximillian Kolbe tonight, when we actually look at those saints, what we're going to find is that there is a whole nother level of holiness that the church raises us to if we are just willing to enter in by that narrow gate. So this is St. Maximillian Kolbe, Triumph of the Heart. St. Maximillian Kolbe, just a little bit of a background. He is like the first saint that I ever heard the words devotion to. Like you'll hear Catholics say, I have a devotion to St. Thomas Aquinas, or I have a devotion to the Blessed Mother, or I have a devotion to John Paul II. Well, I heard a priest say, everybody knows that I have a devotion to St. Maximillian Kolbe, and I got to see the cell in which he died in Auschwitz. And I went up to the priest afterwards. I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean a devotion? And all this means is that you see them as somebody that you want to pattern your life after. You look at them as kind of like a big brother, and you want to be like them. And when I was a Protestant, I got to tell you, like my mom would read me stories of Christian martyrs as a young kid, and I just was always shocked at the faith. And I can remember, props to my dad, I can remember on my way to school one morning having heard a story of a martyr. I think it was the Columbine shooting. And I was talking to my dad, and I said, Dad, if somebody put a gun to your head and said, do you believe in Jesus, would you say yes? My dad gave the best answer. He said, I would hope so. And I think that's the right answer, because we shouldn't presume that we have the courage necessary to do that, because you really need the grace of God to do the right thing. But then when I started coming in and I heard these stories I've heard these stories now as a young man, a young guy coming up in the Protestant churches of these missionaries, and they're giving their life for Christ, and they're just absolutely courageous. And I could have never, if you had asked me, like, what's peak Christianity, I'd be like, that's peak Christianity right there. I don't even know how you would even get more peak than that. And then after I heard that priest in South Carolina talk about Father Kirby, or Father Kirby was the priest, St. Maximillian Kolbe, I was very, very impacted by reading the lives of these saints. I started reading about the saints and reading St. Maximillian Kolbe. In fact, the first story that I read of St. Maximillian Kolbe was a children's book, and it had me weeping as I read it. It was just incredible. I could not believe not only what this man was willing to endure, but also the way that the Catholic faith just raised him up as a more perfect imitation of Christ than what a Protestant could do merely by dying for Jesus. And that might sound like I'm saying, oh, well, these guys are better than those guys. I'm not saying that like those Protestants aren't in heaven or anything like that. But I would challenge you to read the lives of the saints. And they are just like, it's like reading C.S. Lewis versus Tolkien. Both are great and beautiful stories, but Tolkien is seriously at another level. Like, you got to be like real deep into what he's doing there to enjoy Lord of the Rings. So Maximillian Kolbe has a very special place in my heart, and I almost chose him as my confirmation saint. And if I have time afterwards, I will explain why I chose St. Joseph instead of St. Maximilian Kolbe, because it's a pretty cool story. But before we do that, I want to play this trailer, and I don't know if it's going to, oh, sweet. It's going to play right from there. That is great. Okay, so I'm going to cue this up. This is a trailer for the movie Triumph of the Heart.
Come on.
What are we here to do? To kill? No. We are here to break the will of Poland so the Reich may reset the bone. You know the rules. I will choose 10 of you to starve until the missing prisoner is found or until death. This is fun.
I got children now!
I can take his place.
I'm Brother Paul!
Don't leave me. Don't leave me, Albert.
Where have you been these past 2 years? To believe in heaven or God? Certainly you couldn't have been living in this world.
And that's right. We have our voices. We must hold on to our hope. Don't give up. Finish the race.
This is not possible. Tell me, how are they still alive?
I believe that somehow, on the other side of this savage life, everyone who has gone before us is watching, beholding this moment. Love is the realest thing. No one can take that from us, even now.
We'll triumph in our stars and rise.
That is such a good movie. And I'll tell you right now, if you don't know the background of Maximilian Kolbe, I should probably lead with that. Maximilian Kolbe was a saint. Well, he was a priest before he was a saint. And a lot of people just don't know about this guy. And if you want like an in-depth look, get this book, Forget Not Love. It is absolutely incredible. It's just super powerful. Maximilian Kolbe was a Franciscan priest, and he wanted to be a Polish soldier, but he ended up becoming a priest. And so the story goes, Mary appeared to him as a young boy and said, would you like a crown of holiness or a crown of martyrdom? Crown of purity or crown of martyrdom? And as a young boy, he said, I'd like both. And there's a whole kind of lore around this. And as he went through life, he becomes a Franciscan priest. And this is what is the most important thing that you have to know about St. Maximilian Kolbe. And virtually, I have not met a Catholic that knows this, okay? Maximilian Kolbe, yes, first of all, what he's known for, but then I'll tell you what most people don't realize, the significance of his life, the very crucial detail that is very subtle in the movie. But this priest goes around, he starts this awesome ministry. He should be the patron saint of, social media people. In fact, maybe he is. But he had his own, he had a subscription model in World War II for a newspaper and was up against Catholics who were kind of like, newspapers are just garbage. There's no point in doing that. These writings never last. You got to remember, this is the Catholic Church we're talking about. That you just write what's going to last. Why would you write a newspaper? And Maximilian Kolbe had a vision for this, and miraculously, he has a vow of poverty, but miraculously, he gets this fund for, and I'm not going to get into the details because if I do that, we're going to be here all night. But miraculously, he gets the money in order to actually get the printing press. He's praying before Mary, and asking Mary's intercession to get this money. And he looks down and there's a pile of money for this printing press. And, we've kind of heard stories like that. You'd be like, well, whatever. But it ends up, just because you get the printing press doesn't mean it's going to work. I mean, people got to read it, and people did. And it became a massive, massive publication. He ended up starting a City of Mary in Krakow. I think it was in Krakow in Poland. And then he decides he wants to go to Japan. And he goes to Japan, starts printing press there, comes back, and before he leaves, he decides to start a Garden of Mary. You can look this up on YouTube. Highly recommend. It's still there in Japan. And he gets into an argument with the bishop about whether or not it should be on the outskirts of Nagasaki or in the city of Nagasaki. And the bishop says, and it's all outlined in this book. So get this book and you'll get all the details. It's incredible. 2 Protestants end up helping him with this, and they end up converting. But he wants to set up this Garden of Mary behind the mountains. He says that's where Mary wants it. And the bishop says no, because, that's where they bury their dead and all this stuff. There's no way that they're going to actually go. You're not going to be able to have a ministry. They're too superstitious. If you're over where they bury their dead, nobody's going to come to you. So Maximillian says, well, I'm not going to disobey you. I know that Mary will make it so. So a month later, the bishop says, all right, fine, you can do it. So he builds, he's got some brothers with him. He leaves them to build the Garden of Mary behind the mountains. It's a monastery now up there. You can go visit. And he leaves, and he goes back to Auschwitz. And, well, not to Auschwitz, but back to Germany and Poland and all this. And that's when he gets taken into Auschwitz, and he volunteers his life for a father in Auschwitz. What would happen is if a prisoner ran away, the Germans would round up the prisoners in Auschwitz, and they would say, 10 of you are going to starve to death. And they would pick 10 at random. And if you broke rank, you were shot on the spot, that's a miracle in itself. When you see in the trailer, Maximillian walks out and says, I'll take his place. That's a miracle that he didn't even get shot. That's why all the guns are drawn on him. He should have been shot on the spot with no opportunity for dialogue. And he says, I'm a Catholic priest. This man is a father. He has children. I will take his place. And the guard had a real hatred for priests. And so he was like, great. Yeah, let's kill you. So in the end, Maximillian goes in, and this is what everybody knows. This is the story everybody knows. And Maximillian goes in, and he lives longer than expected, 14 days or something like that, and they have to kill him by giving him arsenic injections. What people do not know about Maximillian Kolbe is that while he was in the monastery, there are 2 points that you need to know about Maximillian Kolbe. One is that he gets deathly ill with tuberculosis, such that he loses a function of one of his lungs. And so he barely can breathe. He is on his deathbed from that point on virtually the rest of his life. In fact, at one point, he spends time in the infirmary for so long that his brothers think that he has died, and that they actually offer mass for him. Because they were just like, no surprise there. He was like super frail anyway. So this guy, at one point when he's in Japan offering mass, is so weak that he needs 2 brothers to help him stand up at the altar so that he can lift the host. Okay? Nobody knows this, but this is an illness that plagues him for the rest of his life. Then he goes into Auschwitz. And he takes the place of somebody in the starvation chamber, and he lives longer than most people do. And the way that the book captures this, I'm going to get a little sip of water here. The way that the book captures this is absolutely beautiful. But the second thing you need to know is that he was mocked by his Franciscan brothers often, especially before he got the printing business going. And the book says that he would easily cry oftentimes when he was made fun of. And that's something important to keep in mind as we read this quote, that Maximillian Kolbe was nearly on his deathbed for most of his life, and that he was mocked by his Christian brethren. So here's what the book says. This is according to Andre Frossard. He was he's a Jewish guy who became a Catholic and wrote the Forget Not Love, The Passion of Maximillian Kolbe. It says, hunger is terrible. Thirst is even worse. Dehydration attacks the brain cells first and unleashes silent storms of nightmares and hallucinations. This is Andre Frossard describing what would happen in the starvation chamber. However, now he's going to recount what the actual prisoners witnessed. According to a former prisoner assigned to the bunker as an interpreter, an undertaker who had, before dying in 1947, testified before a notary, Father Kolbe had no delirium and never complained as he grew weaker. For those who have seen the movie, this must be the guy who is cleaning up after each person dies. Like, I think that's actually this character that they're trying to capture. And he never complained as he grew weaker. He did his best to comfort his companions. When they went to take out the corpses, he was most often found standing or kneeling, praying or singing a canticle. A canticle is just like singing Bible verses, repeated by the chorus around him. The witness passing in the corridor said that he thought he was in church. According to him, in the neighboring cells, those dying from previous reprisals who would soon reach the end of their agony had the same impression, as did the prisoners in the courtyard of Barrack 2, who sometimes saw the shaved heads in the moonlight and heard the singing. The jailers themselves were astonished. Quote, "That is a man," end quote, they said. You have a man that this movie portrays, and the crazy thing is, the acting is absolutely top-notch. I mean, like, when you watch this movie, they cover all of that I just described and more. And then, you know, they kind of have some creative license with, you know, Maximillian Kolbe as a character and things like that. But it totally shows you that Hollywood is all about propaganda and not about art. Like, 100%. None of the you'll not recognize a single actor in this movie, and it's some of the best acting I've seen in like years. It made me think of like The Passion of the Christ or Gladiator in terms of the quality of the acting. It's absolutely phenomenal. Like, these guys should all be like getting big movie deals at this point because of their roles in this movie. And what's amazing is apparently they casted these guys just on a casting call on the internet in Poland. So these guys are actually Polish. A lot of them anyway. But it also is something that really gets at the issue of our times. And that is, you don't get Christianity, true Christianity, without sacrifice. Right now, everybody is talking about the fact that, well, you know, we gotta get these people Jesus so that way the country will be saved. Well, where is that in the gospel? When did Jesus say, yeah, follow me and, you know, Rome won't fall? Or follow me and America won't fall? Like, you won't find that in the Bible. Does that mean that Christianity can't help nations? Of course it can help nations. But talk to people in Poland about how Christianity has helped their nation. They've had to endure some of the worst oppressions in the history of the world. That's why, probably why so many saints come out of there. But you've got, during World War II, they are under Nazi occupation. Right after that, they're under communist occupation. And that is a very, very difficult experience. And in both situations, being a Christian didn't help the political situation. And most of the guys who made a difference politically didn't live to see it. So the question about why is St. Maximillian Kolbe in this movie so important for our time is because look around. Netflix has 300 million subscribers. The Pope just did a climate change justice ritual that Arnold Schwarzenegger said, do you realize how much power we have behind us with the Catholic Church? I know, that's horrible, Schwarzenegger. I'll be back. Maybe that would be better. But he won't be back. But he literally says that, we have so many priests. There we go. That's much better. So many priests behind us in the climate change. Man, I can't keep it going. I'm going to just stop right now. Good thing it's late in the post. But people know that we're up against a serious darkness here that is infecting all the denominations. All the denominations. It is getting into all of them. But the thing is that when you look at a life like St. Maximillian Kolbe, you start to understand that the narrow way is the way of suffering. To suffer for your neighbor and for Christ. The gospel is true that it is free, that you can freely accept this call to follow Christ. Anybody can do that. And the only reason why it's possible, and the only reason why it's free, that you're free to do that, is because Jesus paid the price. But to follow Jesus costs something. It will cost you your life, either drop by drop or all at once. And Maximillian Kolbe shows us both. He shows us that you can be squeezed out into a saint, but you're going to have to sacrifice either way. And one of the refrains in the movie is, "You will not bury our speech." In the wake of Charlie Kirk's death, I can't think of a better movie that we should all be watching. Because what we heard during the memorial of Charlie Kirk was, it is better to live and die for Jesus, like die young for Jesus, than to live old living for yourself. But you're not going to be able to know exactly what that looks like by only reading the Bible, because God gave us saints for a reason, for us to understand what it means for you to be a saint, what it means for me to be a saint. And at the center of all of that is the Eucharist, is Christ actually with us, among us now, walking with us in this darkness. Because every major company is still out there as woke as all get out. And you're starting to see people say it all over social media, including the Babylon Bee, making fun of Christians who want to actually make a personal stand against wokeness on Netflix. They shouldn't be doing that. They should be encouraging people to do that. But I suspect many of them are not going to unsubscribe from their Netflix. It's fine. There could be other ways that you can sacrifice to become holier. But when you look at Maximillian Kolbe, when you start reading the lives of the saints, I challenge anybody to start going and read the lives of the saints. Even St. Thomas Aquinas was persecuted during the controversies of his day. In fact, I just read that a king had to put a guard at his monastery because if the Dominicans were seen out in public, they were hated so much that they would be attacked on sight. No saint had an easy life. And we are living in a time where we are not going to have an easy life ourselves because, like Charlie Kirk said, we might need 1,000 Bonhoeffers if we want to turn this thing around. And in that clip, the person interviewing Charlie said, well, can't we choose somebody like Luther? I mean, he got to live his life. And Charlie Kirk basically said, yeah, but I think that we need people who are willing to die for the truth. I think we need that. And I think so too. And if you want to go and see what that looks like at the top of saints, go watch Triumph of the Heart. You are not going to be disappointed and you will be extremely encouraged. It is a hard movie to watch, but man, I felt so encouraged afterwards. And so I just really thank everyone who did that movie. It is just absolutely a treasure. You got to go watch it. I can't wait to buy it and have it however I can. And I'm going to try and do more showings around Cincinnati, Ohio with some friends. So be sure to subscribe here to find out more about that when it comes. But I appreciate everybody listening right now. I'm going to be dropping a video next week of my interview with Christina Janung, and she had crazy pro-life testimony that you've got to hear. So make sure you subscribe, make sure that you comment, make sure you tell me what you thought of this episode, and don't forget to like, thumbs up, and all that stuff. Thanks a bunch for listening.